Hello and welcome, everyone. This is Kaylin's English podcast. This podcast is designed for English learners. I'm here to help you practice your listening skills. I'm Kaylin, a professional English teacher on italki. What's up, guys? Today's episode, I have a special guest with me. Here with me is my friend from England. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Ruth, and I live in Northern England. I live in Leeds, which is in Yorkshire. So it's good to be here on Kaylin's podcast.
It's great to have you today. So today we're going to talk about accents. Ruth's been several places across England, United Kingdom, and also different countries. Ruth, in your opinion, what's the best accent here in the United Kingdom?
Oh, that's a difficult one. Well, I was born in Yorkshire, so I was born in a place called Sheffield. And Yorkshire's a really big county in the north of England, and there's several different types of Yorkshire accents. I'm obviously a bit biased because Yorkshire's my county, so I do like the Yorkshire accent. And where we are now in Leeds, it's slightly different in West Yorkshire to where I was born in South Yorkshire in Sheffield. I've also lived in Liverpool as part of my life. And I've also lived up in a place called Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England, and that's near Newcastle on the northeast coast of England. And that has an interesting accent. I would say my favourite accent, I'm being biased, but I like a Yorkshire accent, but I would say closely followed by the northeast, but that is very hard to understand sometimes, even if you're English.
Yes.
Yes, it's quite a hard accent to get your head round. You have to listen very closely to it, and it's often referred to as Geordie. So you might hear it called a Geordie accent. Yeah.
And what's your least favorite accent, you think?
So I would say there's probably two accents in England that I really don't like. One of them is the Birmingham accent, which is often referred to as Brummy. So if you hear somebody referring to a Brummy accent, that means they come from the Birmingham area, which is in the central part of England. And I don't know, it just has a very nasal quality. It's like almost like they talk through their noses, and it's not that hard to understand, but it has a very odd sound to it. And I would say my second least favourite is Liverpool, which you may well be aware of because it's quite out there in popular culture. So a Scouse accent, which is a Liverpool accent. I grew up with that accent in my teens, and it's very high-pitched, it's very whiny, as in it sounds very like people are complaining. But it's interesting because it's a mix of Irish and Welsh intonation in the accent, and it's kind of mixed together to create the Scouse accent. And when I've had a few drinks and I'm near to Scouse people, I can say things like, "You're right there, la, sound mate." And that's a kind of Scouse accent. And I hate it.
What do you think about the London accent? A lot of people know the London accent and they're used to it around the world. What do you think of the London accent?
So I go to London on business about once a month. And I've got lots of colleagues and friends who live in London. And I think in London, there's quite a few different types of accent. You have Cockney. So I think that the accent you hear on films, like the Guy Ritchie films, tend to be Cockney. You're right there, you're right there, mate. And it's very sort of, Cockney. It's that East End of London, and that's the traditional, what people think of as a traditional London accent. But I actually think the general London accent has got quite neutral. Mm-hmm. So it's become almost, they used to call it estuary English. So estuary, as in a river, estuary. Estuary English was that kind of received pronunciation that they used to teach post-war in England, how to speak properly.
Like the Queen.
Yeah, like the Queen, yes.
Yes,
so
which is still common
exactly,
taught in English.
And yes, that English, that neutral English accent that you hear film stars learn when they have to play an English role, it's quite false because it doesn't really exist in London. You know, we watched a film last night and there was a Japanese actress speaking in an English accent. And it was like nothing I'd heard in England. She was very clear, she was very understandable, but it didn't sound like London or the southeast of England. And I think that with all the different people now living in London, you get a big mix of accents. So I think the London accent doesn't really exist, but Cockney is what I think people think of as
Yeah, I think heavy influence from other places in the world exists in London.
Yeah.
I can hear teenagers speaking like they're from Jamaica, but they're probably not.
Yeah.
Because of the area that they grew up in London and the friends that they keep. So the London accent is definitely not what you anticipate anymore.
There's a lot of influence from South Asian, so Pakistani and Indian. So a lot of people like say in it, you know, bruv and sorry. Yeah, so you hear a lot of Asian English influences as well, because
So that's where in it came from. I never knew that.
In it. So that's sort of Ali G. Have you heard of the character Ali G?
Yeah.
And we have a few comedy series as here in England. Sorry, series, not series. I always get that wrong. There's a couple of comedians. One guy called I forget his name, but he has a series called People Do Nothing on BBC Three. And everything, it's like young British Asians. So there's a lot of influence from young British Asians, I think, in the English accent.
Yeah, tons, definitely. It's really interesting how language evolved after so many different periods of our history.
Yeah.
So you do have a very different London accent, and then you go to various places in England, and you get totally different things.
Oh, completely.
Everywhere.
The one thing that I find really interesting is the southwest of England. You have Somerset, Devon and Cornwall, and that is a completely different set of accents, and we tend to think of those as like country bumpkins, country yokels as we call them, you know, ooh type accents. But then that's also prevalent in Norfolk and Suffolk. So I do struggle if I hear somebody with that kind of rural accent. I don't know if they're from Norfolk, Suffolk, or if they're from the southwest, because they're very similar. And I think it's because they're agricultural areas that don't have any big cities. Well, you have Bristol in the southwest and Exeter, and in Norfolk you've got Norwich, but
which is
that's
where I'm
it,
from
really.
now.
Yeah, exactly. But that's it really. It's mostly an agricultural and rural setting, and they do speak a certain way.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think my favorite accent here in England or in UK in general is Scottish.
Yeah.
I love a Scottish accent. People struggle to understand them, but I think that's great. Absolutely great.
I do. I love Scottish accents. And again, listening to all my Scottish friends, there's all different types. So that's a whole other ball game, which even I don't understand as an English person, where somebody is from in Scotland, depending on their accent. And yeah, I've been told off several times by my Scottish friends for saying, oh, you're from Edinburgh. No, I'm not. I'm from Glasgow. Or, you know. Yeah.
I had two co-workers previously. One was from Glasgow, one from Edinburgh, and they always had to establish, for those that aren't educated with it, which one was which for them. As they always think Edinburgh. Just like here in England, people think everybody's from London. Yeah. But in all actuality, they're not.
No. No. London is just a small part of the UK. But I think it's the same everywhere. You always think the capital city is the country, you know. But it, you know, it really isn't. There's a whole country out there. And then, of course, we've got Welsh, but Welsh is just a law unto itself. So
Yeah, and then you have Ireland, which
And
a lot of
Ireland,
people
yeah.
think that Irish and Scottish are basically the same accent,
No,
but they're
not
not
at
at all.
And in Ireland, you have Northern Ireland, which is still part of the United Kingdom, and you have Ireland, the independent country, and Northern Irish accents are very, very, very distinctive, and they are very different to a Southern Irish accent. So if you listen to somebody from Northern Ireland, you immediately know it's a very distinctive accent. You immediately can say, that's a Northern Irish person, rather than that's a Southern Irish. So that you can distinguish that. Scotland, it's harder in Scotland to know which bit of Scotland. And then, as I say, Wales, just don't go there.
No offense.
No, not at all. And it's really interesting because when you grow up in Liverpool, so if you look on a map, Liverpool is just above Wales. And you can see the influences on the Liverpool accent from Wales. You know, when you listen to people speaking English with a Welsh accent, you can hear how Scouse has developed, and then bits of Ireland has come, because you know it's a hodgepodge city of people from, you know, it was a big port at one time. Liverpool was one of our major ports for the Atlantic coast, so. You had people from all over the world living in Liverpool. It was our second most prosperous city outside London at one time, Liverpool. So pretty much like London, it was a big melting pot of everybody from all over the world. But yeah, no, I do like that. I do love to listen to the Welsh lilt. You know, the lilting accent. Yeah, but then there is the Welsh language, which of course isn't English. It's its own language, which is still spoken in Wales.
I think a lot of people forget that. So when you actually go places like Scotland and Wales, you don't realize they've had their separate languages, and they still use them to an extent. Yeah,
you have Scots Gaelic, and you have Welsh. And actually down in Cornwall, they're trying to revive Cornish Gaelic. I think it's Gaelic. I may have got that wrong, but the Cornish language is seeing a bit of a rise in popularity. So,
it's very fascinating. Yeah. So we hear the Queen talking. That's not your stereotypical accent here in England at all.
Not at all.
Hers is very, very much so posh, is what the British would say.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So the Queen she represents the country, but she's not a true representation
of the accent.
The accent, not at all.
Even the younger members of the royal family still speak very, what we would call posh. They don't speak like the rest of the country.
Not at all.
But yeah.
So somebody has to represent the country.
Exactly. So they should put a northerner in charge, and then nobody would understand them.
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know if everybody understands Boris Johnson half the time, and he's the current person that's in charge. So, well, I think this episode's gone on long enough. Thank you very much, Ruth, for joining me today, and I hope you all had some interesting listening practice, because you might not have heard her accent before, but like she said, she's from Yorkshire, which is up in the north of England, and you've been here basically all your life. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, Kaylin. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
That is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed. If you'd like more content, then please subscribe to this podcast. You can also support me on Patreon. Find me by typing in Kaylin Teacher. On Patreon, you can gain early access to the podcast and transcriptions. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kaylin_teacher. Thank you for listening. I hope you all have a great day. Until next time, bye!